I used to joke that if my house ever caught fire, I'd probably call Daniel before I called 911. He was the kind of best friend who knew my garage code, who had a toothbrush in my downstairs bathroom, who could show up uninvited and still be the most welcome person in the room. He'd been around since college, loud, funny, loyal in that way that makes you believe some people are just built different. And when I got married to Nadia, he was my best man. Not because I couldn't think of anyone else, but because there wasn't anyone else. He gave a speech at our wedding that made people laugh until they cried and cry until they laughed again. I remember the way Nadia looked at him that night, eyes wide with admiration, face glowing from the wine and the string lights. I never thought twice about it. Because why would I? He was my brother in every way that counted. And she was my wife. In the beginning, everything felt simple. Nadia and I weren't perfect, but we were solid. She was the planner, the thinker. I was the fixer, the steady one. She loved that about me. How I never panicked, how I made her feel safe. And Daniel? He was our third wheel in the best way. Sunday dinners, movie nights, long drives with no destination. He filled in the gaps when we got too tired to entertain each other. I never once questioned his place in our life. I was proud of how close we all were. I used to say we were like a family, a strange, patched-up one, but a family nonetheless. But looking back, there were signs. Moments that felt small at the time but now live in my memory like open wounds. A glance that lasted too long. A joke they shared that I wasn't part of. A text she once got late at night, the screen lighting up with just D. I asked her who it was, and she didn't even blink. "Daniel," she said casually. He was sending me that playlist we talked about, and I believed her, because I trusted her. Because I trusted him. Because trust is the thing you give without receipts, without proof, without question, until it breaks. And once it does, every past moment becomes suspicious in hindsight, like your whole history got rewritten while you weren't looking. The first Real crack appeared 6 months ago. I was supposed to be out of town for work, a quick overnight conference 2 hours away. But there was a scheduling issue, and I drove back that same night wanting to surprise her. I pulled into the driveway around 11 p.m. The house was quiet. No extra car. No voices. I walked in, expecting to see her curled up with a book or half asleep on the couch. But she wasn't downstairs. I went up to our bedroom and found her door closed, locked. That was the first time I remember something in my chest tightening in a way that didn't release. I knocked gently. After a few seconds, she opened it with a sleepy face and a blanket around her shoulders. She looked surprised. "You're back early," she said, voice light, eyes darting behind me to the hallway. I stepped inside. The room was normal, mostly, but the window was cracked open, and it was freezing outside. I asked if everything was okay. She nodded, said she'd just fallen asleep early. I told myself I was being paranoid. I kissed her on the forehead. She flinched. That night, I laid awake next to her, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was losing my mind or just starting to see clearly for the first time. I wanted to believe that things were fine, that I was overthinking. But once that seed of doubt is planted, it grows like ivy, curling around every memory, every detail, every quiet moment. I started noticing how often she texted him, how often he dropped by when I wasn't home, how sometimes, when I'd mention a story from my day, they'd exchange a look like they already knew it, like I was late to my own life. I tried to shake it. I told myself they were just close, that I was lucky to have a best friend who loved my wife like a sister. But it stopped feeling like family. It started feeling like a club I wasn't invited to. And no matter how I tried to ignore it, the feeling didn't go away. It got heavier, sharper, more suffocating. 3 weeks ago, I finally broke. I asked her, straight out, no games, no accusations, just, "Is there something going on between you and Daniel?" She stared at me like I'd said something cruel, like I'd insulted her. "How could you even think that?" she snapped. "He's your best friend. He's like a brother to you, to us." She stormed off, slept in the guest room. The next day, Daniel texted me something vague. "You good, man?" I stared at the message for 10 minutes before replying, "Fine." But I wasn't. I wasn't fine at all. Because deep down, I knew. I didn't have proof yet, but I knew. And nothing, no denial, no angry deflection, no insulted tears, could unring that bell. I had spent years trusting two people with everything I had. And now, all I had left was suspicion and silence. And the worst part? I wasn't even sure who I hated more, her, for betraying our vows, or him, for betraying everything else. It's strange, the way silence can start to sound like an answer. In the days after I asked her if something was going on with Daniel, the tension didn't explode. It just thickened. He stopped coming by. She stopped mentioning his name. But the absence was louder than anything they could have said. It was like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see which lie would unravel first. I didn't push it. I didn't ask again. I just paid closer attention. I noticed how she stopped leaving her phone face up, how her laughter sounded slightly different when she was texting, how her body stiffened every time Daniel's name came up on a commercial or in a story I was telling. These weren't confessions, but they weren't coincidences either. And after a while, the quiet started to feel like a cover-up. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who snooped. I used to pride myself on trust. I believed in privacy, in giving space, in not being the guy who checked phones or second-guessed glances. But when you feel like a stranger in your own life, when the people closest to you start acting like you're in the way, you begin to question what dignity is really worth. Was I supposed to keep ignoring the cracks? Keep pretending everything was fine while they built their own little world behind my back? At some point, it stops being about suspicion. It becomes survival. You need to know. Even if the truth ruins you, you need to know who you're dealing with. And one night, I decided that knowing was more important than pretending. She'd gone to her sister's for the weekend. At least that's what she told me. She said she needed space, time to think, a break from the tension. I didn't argue. I kissed her on the cheek when she left, told her to drive safe. She barely looked at me. That night, the house felt cavernous. I poured a drink, sat in the living room, stared at the TV without really watching. And then I saw it, her laptop, left on the kitchen counter, unattended, unlocked. I stood there for a long time just staring at it, like it was a bomb I wasn't sure how to disarm. I knew what it meant to open it. I knew I'd never be able to unsee whatever I found. But my hands moved on their own. I sat down, opened the lid, and clicked into her email. At first, it was the usual clutter: work updates, clothing sales, family newsletters. But then I saw the folder, labeled simply D. My stomach dropped. I clicked it open and immediately regretted it. There they were, dozens of emails. Some were short. Thinking about you. Wish we had more time today. Others were longer. Descriptive. Personal. The kind of words you only share when you think no one else will ever see them. They joked about me, called me predictable, boring, safe. Daniel wrote things like, "He'll never understand you the way I do," and "I hate hiding this, but I can't stop wanting you." She responded with things that made my skin crawl. Memories of nights they spent accidentally alone. Descriptions of dreams she'd had. One email ended with, "You feel like home." I don't know what to do with that. I closed the laptop slowly, like shutting it would also shut off the part of me that now felt hollowed out. But it didn't. I sat there, breath caught somewhere between fury and disbelief. I had proof now. Cold, digital, undeniable proof. I could confront her. I could confront him. But instead, I sat in that chair for over an hour, just trying to remember how we got here. How did I go from trusting them both with my life to sitting alone in a dark kitchen, shaking, with a hard drive full of betrayal? I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, reliving every smile they'd ever exchanged. Every time I'd left them alone thinking they were safe company. I remembered one night in particular, maybe 6 months ago, when I'd had to work late. She and Daniel had gone to a concert together. She said the extra ticket would go to waste otherwise. I'd even thanked him for stepping in so she wouldn't go alone. I'd been grateful. I had no idea that while I was in an office 2 towns over, they were laying the foundation for the most brutal kind of betrayal. Not just infidelity, but coordinated deception. And the worst part? They knew how much I loved them. They counted on it. The next day, I printed the emails. Not all of them, just enough. A handful. I didn't plan to scream or throw anything. That wasn't me. But I needed her to see that I knew. I needed her to look me in the eyes and realize I wasn't blind anymore. I also printed one for Daniel. Just one. I didn't need him to read much. I needed him to understand that the damage was done. When she got home Sunday night, I didn't say a word. I just handed her the stack of papers. She looked confused at first. Then she started reading. Her face changed slowly, then all at once. I didn't yell. I didn't demand answers. I just watched her break. Watched the blood drain from her face. Watched her mouth open like she might try to lie, then close again when she saw the futility in it. "I can explain," she whispered. "No," I said. "You could have explained. Now, you can only listen." And for once, she did. The morning after I handed her the printouts, I woke up before the sun, my body heavy with exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. She hadn't said much the night before. Just cried quietly, tried to reach for me once, then stopped when I stepped back. We'd slept in the same house but in different universes. And when I stood in the kitchen making coffee that morning, the silence between us wasn't just uncomfortable. It was revealing. It told me everything I needed to know. That we had crossed a line we couldn't walk back from. That something had shattered, not in a dramatic crash, but in the quiet way trust dies. Slowly, silently, and then all at once. She came downstairs eventually, her face pale and swollen from crying. She stood in the doorway, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed in her own kitchen. For a second, I thought maybe she'd speak. Maybe she'd beg, explain, offer some insight into how two people could destroy someone who loved them so deeply. But she didn't. She just whispered, "Are you going to talk to him?" I stared at her, stunned by the question. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Can we fix this?" Not even, "I'm sorry." Just him. She wasn't worried about my grief. She was worried about my reaction. About what would happen if I took this outside our broken walls and made it real in the daylight. That's when I realized she wasn't ashamed of what she did. She was afraid of being held accountable. I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. She already knew I was going to see him. I had to. Not for revenge. Not for closure. But because he owed me something, words, truth, something, after taking what he took. Daniel and I had been through everything together. Breakups, college finals, funerals, financial struggles. We'd lived together, traveled together, built businesses together, and I'd let him into my marriage with the same openness. I trusted him with my life, and he used that trust like a key, not just to my home but to my heart. He didn't just cheat with my wife. He desecrated a friendship that had carried me through every stage of life. And I needed to look him in the eye and ask one thing. Why? He was at his apartment when I arrived. He answered the door like he hadn't read the email. Like he hadn't seen the screenshot I sent with no subject line, no message, just proof. For a split second, his face flickered with guilt. But then came the mask, cool, measured, like he was ready to perform damage control. "Hey!" he said softly. "You want to come in?" I stepped inside, but I didn't sit down. He gestured toward the couch, but I stayed standing. I needed the distance. I needed the height. He looked smaller somehow, less put together than usual. The living room smelled like coffee and cologne, and it disgusted me how familiar it felt. I used to feel at home here. Now I wanted to burn the place to the ground. "I'm not here to hear your excuses," I said. "I just want to know when it started." He didn't try to dodge it. Maybe he knew there was no point. Maybe he was tired of hiding. "About a year ago," he said. "It was slow at first. I didn't plan it." "That's the part that kills me," I said, voice low. "You didn't plan it. You just let it happen. Like a fire you didn't bother to put out." Daniel rubbed his face, sighed heavily. I know what I did, and I hate myself for it, man. I do. No, you don't, I snapped. Because if you really hated yourself, you wouldn't have done it a second time. Or a third. Or however many times you crawled into her bed while I was still calling you my brother. He went quiet. I shook my head, rage starting to rise in my throat like acid. You could have had any woman, any stranger, any number of one-night stands. But you had to pick her, my wife, the one person I built a future with. It wasn't like that, he said quickly, like he could still save face. We didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean to hurt me? I echoed, laughing once without humor. You loved me, Daniel. That's what you used to say. I love you like a brother. And this is what you do to someone you love. He looked away, shame washing over his face like rain that came too late to save the crops. I didn't think you'd ever find out. And there it was. The truth. Not guilt. Not remorse. Just the belief that they could keep the lie going forever. You made me the fool, I said. You let me brag about our friendship. You let me thank you for keeping her company. You sat at my dinner table and smiled in my face. I know, he whispered. No, you don't, I snapped, stepping closer now. Because if you did, you'd be on your knees begging for forgiveness. Not sitting here like you still have the right to look me in the eyes. He didn't say anything. He just let the silence fill the space between us like poison. Could have hit him. Part of me wanted to. But violence wouldn't undo what he'd taken. It wouldn't make me whole. It wouldn't bring back the version of me that believed in people. I hope she was worth it, I said finally. He flinched. It wasn't about that. Yes, it was, I said. It was about you, about ego, about wanting what wasn't yours. And now, you can have it. Both of you. I'm done. I walked out without slamming the door. I didn't need to. The silence behind me was louder than anything I could have said. And as I stepped into the cold afternoon air, I realized I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt grief. A kind of grief I didn't know existed. Because it wasn't just the death of a marriage. It was the death of a friendship, of brotherhood, of belief, and I didn't know how to mourn that. You never really think about how much a house holds until you can't walk through it without running into ghosts. Ours wasn't particularly large or lavish, just a two-story place in the suburbs with too many windows and floors that creaked when the weather changed. But after everything collapsed, the house didn't feel like a home anymore. Felt like a liar, like it had been part of the cover-up. Every room had betrayed me. The living room still carried the echo of her laughter when she and Daniel used to binge-watch crime shows on the weekends I worked late. The kitchen, God, the kitchen was worse. I used to come home to the smell of her cooking, see the two of them bent over the island counter, giggling like siblings. I'd smile, grateful they got along so well. I thought it meant I'd done something right. Now, every time I opened that fridge, I felt like I was reaching into a memory that had been poisoned without my knowing. I started sleeping on the couch. Not because I was kicked out of the bedroom, but because I couldn't stomach the idea of lying in that bed another night. I tried once, after confronting Daniel, thinking maybe enough time had passed to reclaim that space. But I laid down and immediately saw it. Not them, not the act itself, but the absence of what used to be sacred. A bed is supposed to be safe. A place where you rest, where you heal, where you whisper secrets into the dark. But that room, that bed, it had been turned into a lie. I couldn't unsee it, couldn't unknow what had happened there when I wasn't around. So I retreated. The couch became my refuge, my punishment, my place to exist in the least painful way possible. She still lived there for a little while. We barely spoke. We became two shadows moving through the same space, avoiding eye contact, avoiding confrontation. It was like living with a stranger who knew all your secrets. She would come and go quietly, and I stopped asking where she went. I didn't want to know if she was still seeing him. I didn't want confirmation of something I already felt in my bones. What hurt more than anything was how comfortable she seemed. Not happy, no, I wouldn't give her that, but undisturbed. As if the worst thing she'd ever done was now just part of her routine. I envied her for that, for the ability to destroy and still move around like she hadn't. I tried talking to a few people. My mom, mostly. I didn't tell her everything at first. Just said things were rough. That I was sleeping on the couch. She asked if we were going to therapy. I laughed. Bitter, hollow. Therapy? What could a therapist fix about this? How do you rebuild trust when the very foundation has been demolished? My mom offered to let me stay at her place, but I said no. I wasn't ready to leave yet. Not because I was still trying to fix things, but because I needed to understand what had happened inside these walls. I needed to see it all for what it was, to stop pretending this house had ever been safe. I found little pieces of their betrayal everywhere. A wine glass in the back of the cabinet that didn't match our set. A receipt tucked into a drawer from a hotel 2 towns over. Dated the same weekend I was at a work conference. A playlist on her phone labeled Rainy Day Vibes that I recognized from Daniel's old Spotify. They weren't even careful. Or maybe they were, and I was just blind for too long. I used to think love meant not asking questions, not doubting intentions. Now I understood that love without boundaries isn't noble. It's dangerous. It gives people like them room to turn your life into a stage, and you into the fool who never saw the curtain fall. One evening, maybe a week after the confrontation, she asked if we could talk. I said yes, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to hear what version of the story she'd tell now. We sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table. She folded her hands, looked at me with eyes that used to feel like home, and said, "I didn't mean for it to go that far." I almost laughed. Almost. "That's what you open with?" I asked. "Not, 'I'm sorry'? Not, 'I understand if you hate me'?" She looked down. "I am sorry. I didn't know how to stop." "You could have told me," I said. "You could have said you were unhappy, that you were lonely, that you wanted out." "I didn't want out," she whispered. I wanted to feel something that hurt more than I expected." "So you used him for that?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I stared at her for a long time, trying to see the woman I married. The one who danced barefoot in the kitchen at midnight. The one who cried when we lost our first dog. The one who used to call me her safe place. But all I saw now was someone I didn't know anymore. Someone who had played a role for so long she started to believe her own performance. "I'm filing," I said flatly. She nodded. Didn't fight. Didn't plead. That night, I walked room to room, thinking about what I would take and what I'd leave behind. I didn't want much. Just my clothes, my tools, a few photos that still mattered. The rest could rot. The house could rot. Because I wasn't going to spend another night pretending the walls hadn't watched me be betrayed in real time. It wasn't just about leaving a marriage. It was about leaving the version of myself that tolerated too much, that loved too blindly, that gave grace to people who hadn't earned it. The man who once filled this house with faith and patience, he was gone. And I wasn't mourning him anymore. The first time she called after I moved out, I almost didn't pick up. I was sitting on the floor of my new apartment, a place that still smelled like fresh paint and possibility, surrounded by boxes I didn't have the energy to open. The mattress was on the floor. The fridge was empty. The only light came from a half-assembled lamp. And still, when I saw her name flash across the screen, my first instinct wasn't anger. It was muscle memory. For 12 years, I had answered her calls in every situation. During meetings, while driving, even once in the middle of a funeral. Loving her had trained me to treat her voice like a lifeline, and it took everything in me to remember she was no longer someone I owed that kind of urgency. I answered on the 4th ring, not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because I wanted to stop wondering what she'd say. The silence on the other end lasted longer than I expected. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, too soft. Like she was talking to a wounded animal, not a man she'd gutted with her choices. "I just wanted to check on you," she said. "Make sure you're okay." I stared at the wall, the one I hadn't decided whether to hang pictures on yet. "I'm fine," I said flatly. "I'm not the one who burned everything down. That should have ended it. But it didn't." She kept talking, like she thought if she stayed calm long enough, she could rewrite the narrative. Like if she sounded sad enough, it would undo what she and Daniel had done. She said she missed me, that the house felt empty, that she couldn't sleep at night. I almost reminded her that I had been the one sleeping on the couch for weeks, that she had filled our bedroom with secrets and still slept soundly while I lay awake in the dark. But I didn't. I let her talk. I let her fumble her way through guilt that sounded more like inconvenience than actual remorse. She didn't say the word affair. Not once. She didn't say his name either. Just danced around the wreckage like maybe I'd forget who lit the match if she didn't point fingers. "What do you want, Nadia?" I finally asked. My voice was steady, but something behind my ribs tightened. She hesitated. "I want to fix this." Somehow, I closed my eyes. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I needed to ground myself. Needed to remember that every cell in my body had screamed for her at one point, and now those same cells had gone quiet. "There's no us to fix," I said. "You didn't just cheat on me. You cheated with the one person I trusted almost as much as you. That's not something you come back from. That's not something you glue back together." "I was confused," she whispered. "Lonely." I almost laughed. "So you found comfort in the one man who sat at our table and pretended to love us both like family? It wasn't like that." "Stop lying," I snapped, sharper than I meant to. "You knew what you were doing. Every message, every look, every lie you told me while his hands were still on your skin. Don't insult me by calling it confusion." She went quiet again, and in that pause, something in me hardened. I realized then that she wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling to be forgiven. She wanted me to do the emotional labor of absolving her, to tell her she was still a good person despite doing a terrible thing. And maybe that's what made this whole thing so ugly. Not the betrayal, not the lies, but the entitlement. The way she assumed I might still pick up the pieces just because I always had. I said, "I loved you so much I stopped loving myself. I bent until I broke. And when I broke, you handed the pieces to someone else." "I didn't mean to," she said, her voice cracking. "But you did," I said. "And now I'm supposed to do what? Comfort you while you mourn the version of yourself that had my respect." There was a sniffle, then a quiet. "So that's it. That's it," I said. The call ended without another word. No goodbyes, no closure. Just a flat line of silence that rang louder than any screaming match could have. I sat there for a long time after, phone in hand, knees pulled up like a wall between myself and the rest of the room. It hit me then. Not sadness, not relief, but something in between. The kind of emptiness that feels sterile. Like walking through a house that's just been cleaned out. No furniture, no warmth, just echoes. But even in that emptiness, I felt safer than I had in months. I didn't block her number. I didn't delete our photos. I didn't need to, because letting go wasn't about erasing the past. It was about refusing to carry it into my future. It was about drawing a line, not in anger, but in protection. For the first time in years, I had no one's needs to manage but my own. No one's lies to unravel. No one's mistakes to explain away. Just me, four walls, and the truth I had finally stopped running from. I stood up, stretched, and looked around the apartment. Still didn't feel like home, but it felt honest. That was a start. I opened the last box near the window: photos, books, a framed picture of my parents. I set it on the shelf without hesitation. Then I picked up one more photo. Our wedding day. I looked at it long and hard. Her smile, my suit, Daniel right beside me. The whole thing was a lie now, but I didn't tear it. I didn't throw it away. I slid it into a drawer. Because some things don't need to be destroyed. They just need to be put away. There's a moment after grief, after rage, after the ache of betrayal finally quiets, where you wake up and realize you're still here. Not as the person you were before it all happened. No, that version of you is gone, buried under broken vows and bruised dignity, but as someone else entirely. Someone you don't fully recognize yet. Someone stitched together by scars, solitude, and the brutal kind of clarity that only comes after people you love gut you without flinching. That's who I was becoming. And for the first time, I didn't resent the mirror for reflecting him back to me. I didn't look for the man who used to believe that love alone was enough to make people stay loyal. I looked for the man who finally believed he deserved more than just survival. And day by day, I found him. Moving into the new place was supposed to feel like starting over. That's what everyone said. But starting over implies a blank page, and I wasn't working with clean paper. I was working with something stained, crumpled, barely legible in places. The kind of page you carry with you not to reread, but to remind yourself of what not to write again. I didn't decorate much. No plants, no rugs, no framed quotes about healing. I didn't need the apartment to look like peace. I just needed it to stop feeling like war. And slowly it did. I came home to silence that wasn't heavy. I cooked meals for one without resentment. I slept through the night without dreaming about them. Her laugh, his hands, my stupid, trusting smile. That was the real healing. Not a grand gesture. Just peace earned one quiet day at a time. People started to ask questions. Friends, cousins, co-workers who didn't know the full story. Where's Nadia? You and Daniel still hang out? I never gave them the real answers. Not because I was ashamed, but because I was finally learning that not everything broken needs an audience. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is survive in silence. Let them wonder. Let them fill in the blanks. I owed no one an explanation for how I chose to rebuild. That was mine. All mine. I stopped trying to justify the boundary. Stopped apologizing for the distance. Because anyone who truly cared wouldn't ask me to let pain back in just to make things comfortable for them. One night, about a month after I moved out, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. I knew it was from her before I even opened it. Her handwriting hadn't changed. Slanted, neat, slightly anxious in how carefully she formed every letter. It wasn't long. Just one page. She said she was in therapy. That she was trying to understand what she did and why she let it happen. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't ask to come back. She said she knew better now, that knowing better had come too late. She ended it with, "You were a better man to me than I ever was a wife to you. I hope one day you remember me as more than what I did." I folded the letter slowly. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just placed it in the back of a drawer and left it there. Not as a keepsake, as a record. A reminder that people show you who they are twice. First when they betray you, and second when they try to explain it away. Daniel never reached out. Not once. And maybe that was the most honest thing he ever did. He knew he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Maybe he thought silence was his apology. Or maybe he simply didn't care enough to face the fallout. I used to miss him like a phantom limb. My best friend. My brother in all but blood. Now, I didn't miss him at all. I missed who I thought he was. I missed the version of him that existed only in my head, the one I defended when people questioned his loyalty. That man had never really existed. And once I accepted that, I stopped grieving. I saw her once, by accident, at a grocery store on a Sunday. She was in the produce aisle, wearing that same beige coat she used to wear on our date nights. She didn't see me, or maybe she did and just didn't react. I stood there for a moment, half hidden by a shelf of cereal boxes, and watched her laugh at something on her phone. Her eyes were lighter, her face relaxed. It hit me then, she had moved on. Not necessarily with someone else, but from the weight of what she'd done. And I couldn't decide if that made her lucky or just numb. Either way, I didn't walk over. I didn't say hello. I just left my cart where it was and walked out the sliding doors into the sunlight. Because that's what healing is. Not confrontation. Not closure. Just knowing when to leave quietly. I think the hardest part of rebuilding after betrayal isn't the loneliness. It's learning to trust your own judgment again. Learning to believe that you'll recognize the next lie before it becomes a lifestyle. That you won't mistake comfort for character. That you won't fall for someone's potential at the cost of your own peace. But slowly I did. I started trusting myself again. Not perfectly, but enough to know that if someone ever made me choose between loving them and respecting myself, I'd choose me every time. So here I am, in a place that's small but mine, with nights that are quiet but whole. I don't hate her. I don't miss him. I don't romanticize what we had. I honor it for what it was and mourn it for what it became. And I move forward not with bitterness, but with boundaries. Not with fear, but with discernment. Because the man I was before let love blind him. The man I am now knows better. I'm not bitter. I'm not broken. I'm not trying to get even. I'm just done bleeding for people who don't know how to hold a heart without breaking it. Some betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people you would have gone to war for. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself from the ashes of trust shattered by the ones closest to you, share your story below. Let's talk about the pain, the healing, and the quiet power of choosing yourself. And if this story spoke to something inside you, like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories that don't shy away from the messy truth. You're not alone.